When the HOA tried to slap me with a $5,000 fine for renovating my own home, I realized I was facing more than bureaucracy. I was facing Vivian Clark, a neighbor obsessed with control and authority. Her relentless enforcement of arbitrary rules threatened to crush not only my renovations, but my sense of fairness. What she didn't know, however, was that I held the real power, control over all the building permits in the district. But just wait until you see how this secret flipped the entire situation on its head and why justice ultimately prevailed. My neighborhood board, the HOA, had always been a shadow over our community, a presence you noticed more than you welcomed. They claimed to protect property values and maintain standards, but I had never thought of them as truly dangerous. It's just annoyingly strict. That all changed the day they decided to fine me for renovating my house. My name is Michael Harris. I had recently purchased an old mansion in suburban Springfield, a house with character but in desperate need of care. From the moment I first walked through its creaking doors, I envisioned transforming it into something vibrant, something worthy of its history. A new garage, a renovated deck for family gatherings, updated windows to brighten the rooms, small improvements to make life better, not worse. I had been careful, checking city codes and regulations, making sure everything I planned was legal. I assumed that as long as I followed the rules, the HOA would either remain silent or maybe even approve. But that morning, as I sorted through my mail, my hands froze on a single envelope. The HOA's seal stared back at me like a warning. My heart skipped a beat. Inside, a typed letter bore the signature of the HOA president, Mrs. Vivian Clark. You have violated community rules. Fine, $5,000. I reread it, hoping it was a mistake. But no, the words were clear. My blood boiled. I had always suspected that Vivian craved control, that she took pleasure in enforcing rules with rigid authority. Yet seeing her reach out through paper and ink to assert dominance over something as personal as my own home struck a nerve I didn't even know existed. She had built her little kingdom in the neighborhood, and anyone daring to step out of line, or worse, improve their property without seeking her permission, was a threat to her carefully maintained order. As I paced the living room, every corner of the house suddenly felt like a battleground. The freshly sanded floorboards, the windows I had meticulously measured, the deck I had imagined hosting summer barbecues on. All of it had become evidence against me in Vivian's eyes. The sheer audacity of it hit me like a punch. I had followed the law, respected the city, yet here I was being punished for daring to care about my own home. Anger surged through me in waves. I thought about the neighbors who silently nodded when Vivian held her meetings, the community members who feared challenging her authority, the sense of helplessness that had always lingered at HOA gatherings. How could someone wield so much power over people who were doing nothing wrong? The injustice wasn't just about the fine, it was about the principle, about having your personal space policed by someone who seemed to take delight in asserting dominance. For the first time, I realized this wasn't going to be a simple matter of paying a fee and moving on. Vivian's letter wasn't a warning, it was a declaration of war, and I couldn't let it go unanswered. The anger that filled me wasn't destructive. It was a spark, a signal that something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was someone who had to fight to protect what was rightfully mine. Shock and anger slowly gave way to a deeper, more persistent pain. At first, I could barely process what had happened. The fine from the HOA felt like a sudden storm breaking over my life. But the storm only worsened when I realized I wasn't alone in this fight. in the ways I had imagined. Most of my neighbors, the very people I had thought of as friends or at least allies, quietly supported the HOA's decision. Their polite smiles and casual nods at community meetings masked a silent agreement with Vivian Clark's actions. They assumed I was in the wrong, despite the fact that every renovation I had undertaken strictly followed city regulations. The sense of betrayal was almost tangible. Every interaction with the HOA became an exhausting battle. Simple phone calls turned into drawn-out confrontations, with Vivian sitting at her desk like a sentinel, her face unreadable yet brimming with disdain. Each word she spoke seemed designed to chip away at my confidence, to make me question whether I had the right to even own property in my own neighborhood. I could feel her eyes even through the phone, searching for signs of weakness. Her motivation was simple and brutally effective: to assert dominance, to maintain an illusion of control, and to remind everyone that dissent would not be tolerated. I began to feel trapped. The house I had dreamed of restoring suddenly felt less like a home and more like a cage. Every corner of my property, the deck I had painstakingly restored, the new windows letting sunlight pour into the living room, even the garage I had built with my own hands, now seemed tainted by the conflict. They were symbols not of achievement, but of tension, as though the very act of improving my home had become a crime in the eyes of the community. Walking through the rooms that had once inspired hope, I felt a growing heaviness in my chest, an emotional weight that made even small tasks feel like climbing a mountain. It wasn't just the fine itself that hurt, it was the isolation. For the first time since moving in, I felt utterly alone. Friends and neighbors who might have been allies were either too afraid or too indifferent to speak up. Every smile at a weekend barbecue felt hollow. Every casual conversation a reminder that I was out of step with the community's unspoken rules. The world I had thought I understood, the suburban streets, the quiet evenings, the sense of shared neighborhood pride, had turned into something alien, a place where rules existed not to protect, but to control, where tradition had become a weapon rather than a guide. I spent nights lying awake, replaying every conversation, every interaction, every moment leading up to the fine. Doubts gnawed at me, whispers of maybe I misjudged something, though logic knew better. Bizarre. The pain was sharpest when I thought about Vivian herself, how her satisfaction at seeing me unsettled fueled every decision she made. Her power wasn't just formal, it was psychological. She had succeeded in making me doubt myself, in turning my home into a source of stress and uncertainty. And yet, beneath the pain, a tiny ember of determination began to glow. The injustice I felt so keenly was also a spark, a signal that I couldn't accept this quietly. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but the first step was understanding the scope of the challenge. I would need to confront not only the rules of the HOA, but the mindset of the people around me. And so, amidst the pain, I began to gather my strength, preparing for the battle that would not only be about my house, but about reclaiming my sense of place in the world I called home. Despite the frustration, isolation, and constant pressure from the HOA, I refused to surrender. My name is Michael Harris, and while most people saw me as just another homeowner at the mercy of neighborhood politics, I had a secret advantage no one suspected. I controlled all the building permits in the entire district. Every project, every renovation, every structural change in the area passed through my hands, or at least legally it could. It was an ironic twist. The very authority that the HOA wielded like a sword over the community was, in fact, limited entirely to appearances. They had rules, regulations, and fines, but no real legal power to enforce them against someone with the right permits. And I had those permits. At first, I kept this knowledge to myself. A quiet ember of hope burning steadily beneath layers of stress and doubt. Each call to a lawyer, each hour spent reviewing legal documents, was a reassurance that I wasn't powerless. I began to map out a strategy, small steps carefully planned, filing applications to legalize every single renovation that I had completed, documenting every interaction with the HOA, and checking every one of their claims against city and state regulations. With each completed application, each verified document, my confidence grew. What had once felt like an insurmountable wall now appeared as a fragile facade, a set of rules that could crumble under scrutiny. The work was methodical, precise, and sometimes exhausting. I spent hours poring over permit applications, cross-referencing codes, and drafting letters that anticipated every argument the HOA could make. Each task, however, reinforced a feeling I hadn't realized I had lost: control. For the first time since receiving that $5,000 fine, I felt as though I had the upper hand. Vivian Clark, the very symbol of oppression in my neighborhood, had no idea that the rules she so proudly enforced were nothing more than shadows of authority. Their power was purely symbolic. It existed in the perception of neighbors, not in any legal reality. This knowledge shifted my mindset completely. What had been anger and isolation transformed into quiet determination and cautious optimism. I imagined the day when every document would be in order, when every argument the HOA could muster would be rendered irrelevant. My hope wasn't naive. It was strategic. I could almost see the scenario unfolding. Vivian, poised to impose another fine, suddenly confronted with irrefutable legal evidence that her authority was empty against someone who held the real power. Even more importantly, hope reminded me why I had started these renovations in the first place. It wasn't just about proving the HOA wrong. It was about reclaiming my home, making it a space of joy, beauty, and life, not stress and fear. Each approved permit, each completed application was a step toward restoring normalcy, toward showing the neighborhood and myself that rules should serve the people, not trap them. As days turned into weeks, hope solidified into a quiet, steady confidence. I could feel the tension in my chest easing, replaced by a sense of purpose. The fight wasn't over, but I had discovered the truth. The real power was in my hands all along, and with that knowledge, I realized that the future, once uncertain and oppressive, was now mine to shape. Finally, the moment I had been quietly preparing for arrived. After weeks of meticulous planning, careful documentation, and strategic filings, I was ready to confront the HOA with undeniable evidence. Every renovation I had undertaken fully complied with city codes. My house, the deck, the new garage, the windows, every detail was not only legal but exemplary in its adherence to regulations. The sense of anticipation was almost overwhelming as I prepared to present my case, knowing that the balance of power, which had seemed so heavily skewed toward the HOA, was about to shift completely. I scheduled a meeting with the board, and there she was, Vivian Clark, poised with the air of someone used to commanding authority. I could see the confidence in her eyes, the assumption that she held the upper hand as always. But this time I held more than confidence. I held facts, permits, and the law itself. As I began to present the documents, referencing every permit and every regulation, Vivian's composed facade faltered ever so slightly. Each objection she raised was met with precise counterpoints. Each attempt at intimidation dissolved under the weight of verifiable truth. The $5,000 fine that had seemed so absolute, so threatening, suddenly held no power at all. As the minutes passed, the room's atmosphere changed. The neighbors who had once quietly nodded along with the HOA's assertions now leaned in, eyes wide, whispering among themselves. The realization was dawning on them. The power Vivian wielded was a construct, not a law. Their admiration, barely contained, was a quiet chorus that reinforced the victory I felt within. It wasn't just about overturning a fine. It was about demonstrating that justice, careful preparation, and steadfastness could prevail against intimidation. Standing there, I felt an overwhelming sense of triumph, not merely over bureaucracy, but over the fear and self-doubt that had been imposed on me. It was the triumph of clarity over confusion, of truth over perception, and of courage over control. The victory was tangible in the room, in the nods and the quiet respect from those who had once doubted me. I realized that this experience had transcended my own struggle. It had sent a message to everyone around me. Rules are meant to protect and guide, not to oppress, and standing firm in the face of injustice can inspire change. Even more powerful was the personal lesson I carried forward. I understood now that the true strength wasn't in permits or legal documents alone. It was in knowing your rights, maintaining resolve, and acting with integrity. The fear and isolation I had endured in the early days of the HOA's challenge seemed distant now, replaced by a sense of empowerment that was both personal and communal. My story was no longer just about me. It had become a quiet testament to perseverance, a reminder that knowledge and preparation can shift even the most daunting circumstances. As I walked back through my house that evening, sunlight streaming through the windows I had installed, I felt a sense of peace and pride. Every renovation, every decision, every step of the struggle had led to this moment. A moment that was as much about inspiration as it was about victory. I knew that anyone watching, anyone facing similar struggles, could take heart in this truth. Even when the world seems aligned against you, understanding your rights, acting decisively, and refusing to be intimidated can completely change the game. Triumph is possible, and with it comes a lasting inspiration that reaches far beyond a single victory.